Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from the Right to Read Initiative. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Corina Fitznar from Vancouver Island, and she is going to give us a look into some of her favorite resources for helping students in the middle school and high school years catch up to their peers in reading. Welcome, Corina. Thank you for joining me again. I really enjoyed our previous conversation about your journey and the recommendations that you have for other educators looking to go down that same path of learning about the science of reading. Why don't you give listeners a little bit of a background about who you are, what you've done, and what you're currently doing?
Okay. I'm Corina Fitznar, and currently I'm Secondary District Coordinator of Instruction and Innovation for School District 79 at Cowichan Schools in Duncan, British Columbia. And so we have 6 different sites, and I work with teachers and full staffs and all sorts of learning initiatives and whatever their professional goals are. I have taught K to 12, largely more on the humanities side, but of course in elementary in those years, teaching all subject areas. I loved teaching mathematics at that time. I have a Bachelor of Education, of course, Bachelor of Arts and Liberal Studies, Interior Design Diploma, and a Master's in Curriculum and Instruction focused on early childhood education out of UVic. Yeah.
Awesome. That's amazing. So when we're talking about favorite resources, can you start off with, some of the favorite resources to help other educators build that understanding of what it is to align our practices with the science of reading?
Okay. Let's see how to go about this. I suppose I like to ground everything. I find sort of the useful piece for people to really sort of dive in and understand science of reading is Scarborough's rope. Mm-hmm. And it's super helpful for people to sort of find their place and in their roles. So especially in secondary, we have different discipline areas and different roles as far as whether it's supporting literacy interventions or sort of tier 1 academic work, or even a lot of the applied design and skills classes, arts classes, STEM classes, where there's a lot of oral language, but there's still such great contributions that those teachers can make to overall literacy, and people are embracing that. So one thing that I found that I think is I'm very happy I found this, it's by Reading Ways. And this Reading Ways piece has taken the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope and sort of recreated each one of those graphics to unpack it in the context of sort of main discipline areas. So of course, it hasn't unpacked into, for example, the art class and really unpacking the oral language piece. I'm working on that as a project. But science, they've done science, history, mathematics, and language arts. And of course, it's remembering that language arts is also a discipline of itself as we move up. So it's a fantastic resource online. And I think as a starting point, it just really helping people to find their contributions. So it'll unpack things like language structures in science being really succinct, in history where we don't use sort of the personal I, even though we're building arguments of opinions, in mathematics, like let X be whatever. So all of those structures really in a concrete way. And then pairing that sort of in that general sense of what are the literacies of my discipline, there's another resource that complements this, and it's by the Victoria State Government out of Australia, another web resource. And it's their Literacy Teaching Toolkit. And when you look up their discipline area pieces, it's fantastic because they have very practical, like what are the literacies of the discipline? And what does that mean in practice? And there are videos of teachers, sort of senior teachers of those discipline areas, talking about literacy in that classroom. So they're making it very real and concrete. So in the general sense, I think those are brilliant just for situating discipline area literacy. And another actually piece that really speaks across curriculum is the knowledge gap. And so Natalie Wexler's a knowledge gap. And what that really does for, of course, the focus is on background knowledge and vocabulary. So spoiler alert, the importance of background knowledge and vocabulary. And there is research to suggest that after foundational reading level is achieved, reading proficiency, that it's background knowledge and vocabulary that are the biggest indicators of student success and ability to think critically and problem solve. So senior teachers know that, they say that, they talk about it, but this really values and honors their content areas and the importance of the explicit teaching of their content, that of course we want to be engaging with higher level thinking and the competencies, but that content knowledge is the knowledge that we can use to communicate and build vocabulary. So how do we know if we're reading something properly, or how do we engage in upper level text if we don't have any information? So that really drives home that importance. And then for the vocabulary instruction itself, we're sort of pulling from a lot of pieces, but Anita Archer and her videos, like, she's great to watch. It's such practical modeling of how to, she really has that sort of direct instruction. So if she's directly teaching some morphology, or she's directly teaching something, and then indirectly, as she's doing this, just engaging it and getting the kids using the language, and she's using the language, and that drenching everyone in that rich vocabulary use. So when on our campuses, we're really talking about sort of indirect strategies and how to drench people in rich vocabulary through oral language and dialogue and Socratic discussion, that sort of thing. And then for explicit word mapping and semantic mapping, a lot of people use Marzano's Big Six, or six sort of vocabulary. It's like a process and strategy piece. And on teachthought.com, they unpack that quite nicely. Some people find that resource quite useful. And teachthought.com, Marzano's 6, you find that.
Just quick to interrupt.
Yeah.
For those of you listening live, I wanted to let you know that I am making sure that all of these resources that Corina is talking about today will be available in the show notes on the video replays and in the podcast episode. So don't worry about trying to write these down and take screenshots. It will be available to you. So what I really want to make sure is that you're just enjoying and absorbing all this wonderful information. And one thing that I wanted to highlight with a lot of the things that you're talking about now is what you're trying to do is close that gap that we're seeing with the Matthew effect that's happening with these students because of those low literacy levels, right? And because we're dealing with students in the middle school, high school grades, they have had years where they have not been reading as much or as quality materials as their peers. So they haven't had the same exposure to vocabulary and content that builds their background knowledge, understanding of the world around them, and helping them understand grammar, syntax, and diving deeper into these materials. And so far, I mean, the ones that you've listed are great for helping with that.
And I find, like, referring back to Scarborough's rope in our planning, like for myself and with the teachers, like we're just sort of, it's like the cheat sheet to keep ourselves sort of into, am I am I tending to all these pieces of that language, and considering that with where it fits in the teaching? It's so helpful. And actually it's funny because hitting on what you just said there, and part of the flaw in our curriculum, I love in the upper grades for a whole lot of reasons. But I think in some cases the baby's been thrown out with the bathwater in a whole lot of ways. But when you get a little bit older, of following your passions. Like I do teach through inquiry, and I am a firm believer in constructivism, but constructivism doesn't mean just free for all exploration. You stop there. You add on the concrete, explicit stuff as well, right? In addition, and there's a process. So these like students being allowed to uber specialize. When they're younger, that's great. I'm passionate about ponies. I'm going to read everything about ponies and look about ponies. And then the next grade, oh my gosh, I could build on my knowledge of ponies. Oh, look at all this, equine, yay, pony, and going on and on. And then it can become because the language changes in grade 4. And if we don't change our instruction, it's getting more and more into those Greek and Latin roots. And it needs that explicit instruction, like these resources and a couple of those I'll show. Or the gap just widens and widens and widens. So then ponies becomes a strategy for avoidance. So then you get this kid and they leave grade 7, they go off to, middle school, high school. And man, do they know a lot about ponies, but they don't know a lot about anything else. And it's been, we need to encourage, little Timmy's passions for ponies. And that's fantastic. And we don't want to take away from that, but part of our piece is to broaden, which is, again, spoiler alert, the big point here. And yeah, I just find that really, and as someone with a real diverse background and someone who didn't have the privilege of coming into teaching at a time where you just jump into a grade, like I've K to 12 up and down, 1 year in primary, the next year I'm senior, and then it's Spanish, and then it's art. I really value the breadth. And I think myself as a learner, I sucked at high school. I aced university because I have a great amount of background knowledge to tap into. So I've always thought that was really important to build with students. So I love that that's research supported. But yeah, that specialization thing, I think one of the converging factors of why we're there. So in broadening genres and all that, and that vocab build and background knowledge of not just accessing what they know, because if they don't know anything, what are you going to access? But building it goes hand in hand with the vocab. So anything by the very, very prolific Timothy Brzezinski, who is everywhere from heavy academic studies to Walmart shelves. So a bit of recycling of his own work and with various partnerships, but lots of good practical pieces. So this Greek and Latin roots, keys to building vocabulary, filled with games and activities. So especially teachers who are just starting to play with this. And I have some teachers playing with word walls and really engaging. They found these really easy to use and backing up sort of practice games to back up their explicit instruction. So that's been really helpful. And
well, just while you're reaching for the next one, I want to highlight that it's very easy to get lost in morphology. And there is so much to learn and understand. And there are a lot of passionate people out there who are firm believers in its importance. And they're very strict about following the exact route to them. But there is a lot to learn and master. So if you're just getting into the beginning of this, there is no shame and no harm in looking at a resource. As educators, I think we're guilted into thinking that we have to create our own content. Because a lot of the teacher education programs is all like, okay, we'll create a lesson plan and a curriculum, or sorry, not a curriculum, the word's escaping me, like a program.
Unit.
There we go. A unit of study on a certain topic, and you have to do it all by yourself and do this. But the thing is, you would not have any time for yourself. And, it's for people who become word nerds, it's fascinating to read this stuff. I know in my own bookshelf behind me, I've got several books related to morphology, etymology, spelling, and the English language. But it can be very overwhelming going through this information. So it's all about doing a little bit at a time and not feeling shame using resources that already exist to help you along the way.
Mm-hmm. And with that, like, even if you just start playing with prefixes, suffixes, and bases, and even Joan Sedita, Keys to Literacy, she has a little section on morphology that's really simple and basic, with a list of sort of the most common prefixes, suffixes, and roots. And she, even just to bring that attention into the consciousness and start playing with words that way as a starting point is already a huge gift, I think. And then, steal some games from Racinski, Bob's your uncle.
Exactly. And go from, sometimes like Latin and Greek roots were taught by memorization in the past, and being able to recite the definition isn't going to do you much. We need to actually put those skills into practice and see how we can take apart words and understand them based on the affixes or the base elements we find in them.
And it is fun. Like, the teachers were kind of looking at me like, you're nuts, because it was, and of course I'm referring to teachers who are over 50, the ones I was working with, because we remember how torturous it was, and it was that memory thing. Yeah. But again, back to my enthusiasm around constructivism, that's that part of, by playing with the words, like constructing your own meaning, by having that experience, that experiential learning of, I think it could mean this. Now, explicitly show them how to use a dictionary and look it up, because just go to the dictionary, come on, that's horrible. But then if you do that, and this strategy shows up in books over and over and over, first construct one's own meaning, or the students, and then go and look that up. And two things happen. One, you have a lived experience that knowledge sticks to, so you actually remember that piece, because you're like, oh, I thought it was this, but I was wrong. It's this, right? But then we're actually teaching them how to use a dictionary properly, which is it's a big daunting task if you don't have a starting point. So yeah.
Well, and thanks to the wonderful World Wide Web, there is a great resource called Etymology Online, and you can type in, well, I've always had a word come up when I typed it in, so I'm pretty sure it's almost any word in the English language, and it's going to give you the background and looking at how it's constructed on the word. So that's a great resource, even if you don't have a dictionary around.
And that includes actually common phrases and casual and slang too. And there's a lot of social justice terms in there too. So that word study and where the origins and what was the meaning, like it just sort of starts overlapping, because vocabulary holds meaning and conceptual knowledge that it just crosses over into so much. Yeah. I did put into the chat a link to a document that I wasn't sure how to describe, big honking title.
I love William Van Cleve's work.
Okay, great. Because this is like a go-to all-inclusive getting started on morphology, called Morphology Matters, Building Vocabulary Through Word Parts. And it's William Van Cleve, as you just said. This package, it's sort of intro, word knowledge, first level, second level, more advanced elements. It's a great starting resource. I find it quite comprehensive.
And unfortunately, William Van Cleve passed away just over a year ago, but you can still access a lot of his amazing webinars. And he's such an enthusiastic and amazing individual. So watching these and the infectious excitement about this is really great. And he also has some great resources when it comes to constructing meaning and looking at the syntax and the semantics of the language.
Mm-hmm. What a loss. That's great. So, and in strategies, again, this is sort of an overall, it's not usually, people don't really look at it typically for secondary. It's not sort of built that way. So teaching reading sourcebook by CORE, so consortium of reading excellence. However, it is a good go-to as far as what are the meaningful instructional strategies and practices in a more universal way. It's not going to give you all the answers and all the activities, but if you're really trying to understand what are the big bang for the buck practices that I can employ, it's a great guide for that. We actually have a copy of this on all of our secondary campuses, and they're being used a lot. I mean, it's big honking thing. And generally in secondary, we're usually using, well, the intervention teacher who's using the lower part of the rope is at the front of the book, and the tier 1 discipline area teachers are in the back of the book. So yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, I think it really highlights the importance as educators committing to being that lifelong learner. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But it is nice, like you said, with the vocabulary, like just diving in and dabbling, and then we just get to know more, and then all of a sudden something happens where it's like, oh, I remember that, or it starts becoming more logical.
Well, and the other thing that as we get into that morphology piece in the, the upper grades, or, I guess even, once we start intermediate school, is giving students understanding of spelling patterns that relate to morphology. The one that always comes to mind for me is the grapheme PH representing the phoneme. And the reason for that is the Greek did not use the Roman alphabet, and in their alphabet, there was not the letter H. So any word that is one of those scientific words that has that morphological structure, when you're spelling it, use a PH, not an F. And this is where, when you see spelling bees and students are asking the origin of the word, that's why, because there are different spelling conventions. And that's why we have so many ways or graphemes or phonics that represent our vowel sounds. There are so many different ways to spell the English vowel sounds. And that's because English is a language that's taking words from languages all over and preserving the spellings based on those languages. Mm-hmm. So once individuals understand that there is that method to the madness of English spelling and reading and understand it, I just have to mention that PHF thing to most people once, and it sticks in their head. And it's just one of those factoids that it's like, oh, that makes sense. That's why it's philosophy or photography. That's why there's that PH in it. And little kids can pick that up pretty easy. And then older kids who are struggling, and you're like, you know what? Actually, this is why. It's not just because I said so.
Yeah.
It's because of the Greeks. Blame the Greeks.
Yeah. And likewise at the, early form, everybody remembers their grade 8 social studies and, the Germanics up in the north, and then the Romans came up, and, you get this sort of a timeline, and it makes sense as far as the more simple roots, Germanic roots of the language, and then the complexity growing. Yeah,
exactly. And the CH having the K sound from the French, right? So it is fascinating, and more and more people, I think, are becoming those word nerds. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple books that I think are worth mentioning that really help you as an educator understand these things. The first one would be the logic of English, or uncovering the logic of English. And personally, I think that is one that every teacher should read. It's not a difficult read. It's very direct, systematic instruction on the logic of the English writing system. And according to Kindle, it's about a 4.5-hour read. So really, it's not that bad. And for those of you that are stuck on your iPhone reading whatever pops up, or you get on, those YouTube rabbit holes, take 4.5 hours away from that, read this book, and I can promise you, you're not going to regret it.
Mm-hmm. Or 1 week's to and from school commuter listen.
Exactly. And I'm pretty sure the Knowledge Graph is available as an audiobook on Audible.
Oh, and on the Science of Reading podcast, which is phenomenal. I mean, I've just found so many great things on there. The Science of Reading podcast, which I listen to, I think on Spotify and on the iTunes, whatever podcast thing. There is one where they interview Natalie Wexler, Knowledge Gap, and it is a great listen. And that has had so many secondary teachers fired up. I've passed that one around, like just texted a few people who were on my phone when I first listened to it. And that really stirred a commotion. Yeah, that was a great one. And I just realized I didn't really have a resource for it. Maybe you do, but as far as what's been a powerful strategy is the semantic word mapping. And so there's the definition in one's own words, examples and non-examples, related words, same topic or roots, and then synonyms and antonyms. So those pieces, I have one that I made that I'm willing to share, and it just has all those sort of research supported pieces on one sheet. And depending on the word, it would change how you would be using it, like whether or not you draw it or you don't draw it, all that sort of things, just to really get that conceptual understanding. And then each piece of it, like for example, the definition piece draws on what we spoke to before. There's still a process for each part. There's an explicit process for each piece. It's not about just filling in a sheet. It's about using it as a tool to work through. So again, I wouldn't do it for every word because that would be painfully boring and soul sucking for everyone. But it really does also, by explicitly teaching those pieces and taking the time with some of the words, it gives a toolbox for those students, especially, we're talking secondary or that 4 to 12 crowd, that they can employ those skills themselves to help themselves with their learning and acquisition of vocabulary. So that's a big one. Interestingly, and I would love your opinion on this, but vocabulary, their way, and that word's their way. It's interesting because a lot of people are very attached to it, and just doing word sorts, I mean, come on. But there are lessons, and they have the orthographic knowledge, the word patterns, syllables and affixes, content specific instructions, that a lot of people really do enjoy that resource. I haven't really paid attention to it in the last few years, but people are enjoying it.
Well, I think the main goal of vocabulary is not only teaching the student the words, but moving it from their receptive vocabulary to their expressive vocabulary, right? We don't want just the students to be able to hear the word and kind of understand what it's meaning. We want them to be actually able to take that word and use it themselves. And, writing a definition in a sentence for the word isn't going to do anything. It's a waste of everybody's time and effort. We want them to really understand how to use the word, use it in different contexts, and use it repeatedly. I mean, there's those emails that you can sign up for word a day or word a week, and those page calendars where you can get a word. And, you read it, you get the definition, maybe use it once or twice, but you're not actually using it in your vocabulary unless you make that conscious effort. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important as an educator, regardless of grade level, to make that conscious effort to make sure the language that you are using with your students has those higher level vocabulary words. So you are using the proper terminology for different aspects of what you're discussing. And this is what's going to make the biggest impact with them, hearing those words regularly, seeing them within writing, seeing them across contexts, and just going that one step beyond from just copying out the definition and regurgitating the answer, right?
Absolutely. And that's another advantage. I'm always on a bandwagon about dialogue and Socratic discussions, because it gives a context with purpose to have an upper level, like a higher level thinking discussion where that vocabulary, there's an opportunity and a purpose to use it. I actually have a strategy has been for the students to have a cheat sheet, essentially. So in Social Justice 12, they had our social justice language. So when they were speaking about something, they were using the correct words. And so myself, as the person coaching the communication, I'm coaching for them to explicitly use the term. I believe there's a term for that, or could you, support your ideas with examples from the text? So all the structures that we're teaching, all that explicit teaching becomes reinforced in a way that we can give them direct feedback in the moment that, otherwise you're writing it down on 24 pieces of paper and hope that they may or may not, right? Whereas if you did a piece of reading, you want to think with the text. What was an example from the text? I can see you're drawing on your background knowledge there. It's a very interesting point. Is there something within the text that also supports that point of view? So this happening and the kids using their vocabulary and I'm using it, it just makes everything real and lived. And it comes out into either the receptive reading and their processing of the reading and the expressive writing. That's such an anchor piece. It's almost like, I feel it's like fluency, the bridge between, right? So,
well, another way that we can facilitate that is when we're working on that comprehension piece with our students and not focusing just on the surface level questions and making them dig deep and understand and look more critically at what they're reading and being able to use that knowledge to answer those deeper thought questions, which is making them use that vocabulary and the knowledge that they're learning as they're reading, instead of just, okay, I'm skimming the questions before I start reading the text. I'm highlighting what I'm looking for as I read through it and just copying and pasting the answer into it. That's not helping anyone. And marking that work is really, really boring. Right?
So blue taxonomy is our best friend, I feel.
Exactly.
Yeah, because we have the, of course, in the curricular competencies, and it is a well-researched strategy for question generation and answering, but also for our planning. Like, at what level are we inviting the students to engage with text, right? So there's our own self-accountability, but by explicitly teaching Bloom's, the learners do get better at that and answering those open-ended analysis questions. And it's funny because sometimes people say, oh, kids these days, they don't know how to, they're not critical thinkers. And some of those conversations that I've been part of have been, the design of this assignment didn't actually invite that. So some of those questions we ask, how we ask them. So a question like, there's a question that I have asked the students has been equally as difficult in grade 12 as it was in grade 2. And it was around the Lorax, and in the 1971 film of the Lorax. And in the book, the Lorax didn't have a face. So why is that? And, you know, because sometimes I found in conversation, people, I have a friend that we push against each other a lot. I love pushy friends. And she's like, well, I just don't think that way. And it's like, well, we need to sit with it and take the time for it. And it's awkward. And there's some awkward silences they can. So questions like that, and she did play with that Lorax one, they just didn't get there. And so we were talking about how to create provocations, and like, don't tell them the answer. They need to get there and have that reinforced repeatedly, and get to the critical and creative thinking for text analysis. But, you know, having my grade 2s also drawing on that example, because they did it in grade 2. And then all of a sudden somebody goes, it's because it's us. It's because it's us. It's because it could be anybody. It could be anybody causing the harm. It could be any company. It could be, you know, whatever. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful things. But it's possible. Field of dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah. Well, another point that I think is important to highlight is that we can take the time to explicitly teach this stuff to our students. And one of the best examples that I can think of in my personal experience is in grade 11. My social studies teachers had us read Machiavelli's The Prince. Now, if you're not familiar with The Prince, it was written centuries ago. And it was this man who was being humble, saying the only thing that I have to give to you is my knowledge. And some of the chapters in his book are literally a paragraph. And, you read at the surface, like, yeah, whatever, like, this is what he's saying. But then my teacher spent, I think it was 2 days on one chapter that was 1 or 2 paragraphs long. And we went through it time and time again. The first time, just, okay, so what's it saying? What's it saying? And then he took us through his thinking process, line by line, and offered different ways of interpreting it. And when, it's only 2 paragraphs, yes, it's slow, but it really makes you stop and think and realize that you're not just, regurgitating what's said in the text when you're answering these things. And, we can do this from a younger age with simpler texts, right? I mean, poetry is an excellent way to teach this deeper and critical thinking when we're talking about similes and metaphors and word choice. And that definitely helps our students engage in that critical thinking. And, students of various ability levels can do this. So even some of our students that are designated with various disabilities can still engage in this critical thinking. And it's just taking them to that next level so they can gain a deeper understanding and recognize that their opinion isn't the only opinion and their knowledge isn't the only knowledge.
That's that beautiful thing again, dialogue, as opposed to debate, right? There's a whole purpose is to gain multiple viewpoints. We're not there to, we're there to deepen and enrich our understanding, to better articulate, communicate, and to better ask questions to understand others. But it's that whole aim first to understand and then to be understood. And it is a beautiful, receptive, expressive exchange. And song lyrics also can be really great for that. And then the kids can be participating and maybe contributing. Hey, this one has this hidden meaning. And there's a really great notice and wonder process that I use over and over. And it can be with written text or visual, where it's just, what are you noticing? I don't interpret. I just sit with what is actually there and that ends up layering into understanding fact and opinion. I mean, it all layers into different ways of analyzing text, but just noticing And then wondering, so now we start to interpret. So we've just noticed all these things. I've noticed this paint has pink and these orange things and shadowy things. Okay, what could this be? Oh, it could mean the sun's coming there, whatever. What could it mean? And then looking at it in a summary way, what is the main idea? What's the main point of view? What's the main message of that text? And then from there, if this is what you're saying is the point of view of that creator, of that author, now go back to your observations. What are 3 examples from that text? Mm-hmm. And it's just such a beautiful, like in the first few weeks that I have a class, we do that 3 or 4 times a week. And then it just becomes, they all become really proficient at it. Mm-hmm. And then that's the structure of interpreting text, of mm-hmm. writing, of speaking, right? And just reinforces that.
Well, and I think one of the things that you mentioned was really bringing that popular culture in with songs and rap. And it made me think of a stand-up comedy routine by Eddie Murphy. And I'm not going to do it word for word because I don't know it that well, but it also isn't that polite and academic. But basically he's saying like, a lot of these favorite songs that kids are singing or people are singing along to and love, they don't actually stop and think what the lyrics are actually saying. And do they agree with that? Mm-hmm. And especially in, the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s, when we look at the rap music, it's very demeaning to women and race, and saying, well, are you actually thinking about what you're saying as you sing along to these songs? Is it something that you would say in another situation? Like, do you agree with it? And then, I know there's songs that are favorites of mine that I'm like, or were favorites of mine. Mm-hmm. And I still love the music behind them and the melody and how it sounds, but I don't love the message.
Yeah.
Right. And it is making that association that is important and drawing that and then using that popular fiction to do so.
Absolutely.
To say, well, why do you think they're saying this? What put them in this situation? Why did they create a song about this? Mm-hmm. What is it saying about the person? Right. And I think a great one, I guess it's a little aged now, is looking at Taylor Swift's music.
Yeah.
So she has a lot of great communication in her songs, discussing, what's happening in her life, and then asking if you can relate to that. So that's a way that we can take this reading instruction to that deeper level and really support our students. So what are some of the other favorite tools that you have that you may not use yourself when you're working with students, but you give to others to use with their students?
All right. So this Lewis and Strong literacy instruction with disciplinary texts, they actually, I wrote this down somewhere. Where did I do that? There is a podcast that they're interviewed, and among the many strategies in here, there is, and they do a lot of work with scaffolding. So differentiation, we want to meet the kids where they're at, but scaffold, we need to get them to that place of independence and that gradual release model. And it's like, I do, you do, you do, or sorry, we do, I do, we do, you do. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. So a lot of those scaffolding models, and then what do you do to use that? This has the quad text set strategy in it, which I love.
Can you talk a bit about what that is, like a quad text strategy?
I can. So I'm pretty sure this would be backwards, but this is my own sort of thing that I made. So a quad text set is, so thinking of your topic. I just created one with a colleague for an indigiqueer theme of LGBTQ plus community for Indigenous context and context. And we were looking at Joshua Whitehead's poetry. So we were thinking of other complementary texts to go with it. So we're starting to build resources around the structure. So what ends up happening is you have one text, which is a target text, and that would be at or above grade level, right? And just that importance in all the research saying we need to build strategies for students, even if they're struggling, to be able to access grade level text. They need to be exposed to it and build as many strategies possible. So with the 4 in the quad, there is the target text, which is at or above grade level, should be challenging. A visual text, so it could be a piece of art, video, whatever, that's something that everyone can access. It's visual. We can build background knowledge in the vocabulary that's needed. The order, of course, would change depending on the topic and what you're doing. Accessible text, something that everyone can read, often brief, short, maybe just written for our younger audience on the same topic. And it could also be a song. And then a brief complementary text. So that's sort of my own spin on it. Because when they said a second text, I thought it's really important to expand the way that we interact with topics. So if it's a very nonfiction informational text piece, how about a poem or a song on the same topic? Or so fiction, nonfiction, or, you know, comedy, drama, mix it up in text forms or forms of expression. So the purpose of that, of course, then is getting at the information, building the vocabulary and background knowledge in a more sort of rich, diverse way, but then also building multiple access points to that target text. So as a strategy to get to building and practicing sophisticated reading and writing and discussion skills, there is an online resource that has background knowledge to this for teachers. The research, the why, it's super practical resource. I love it. It is in the context of social justice, and it is the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, published online by Victoria State Government. So it's Australia. And their disciplinary literacy section. And so they go over the quad text set and with practical examples and ones that you can download. What we're doing right now across a bunch of our campuses is, I mean, some people are, different departments, is they're building not just like one set, so one of each, it's more of a list. So when we did this one, there's the 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, but there are about 3 to 5 resources mentioned in each one. Mm-hmm. So they're just good teacher tried. It's like, oh, I love this. The kids love this. This was great. So you could sort of mix and match. I'm going to use that painting and that song and that nonfiction. And yeah. So far, so good. People are finding that strategy really useful. And it's part of the feedback was it just brought the sort of diversity and intention of being more diverse within our texts into the teacher consciousness and intention, right? Like, oh yeah, right. Building that background knowledge, build the background knowledge, especially halfway through the term when everybody gets really busy and they're freaking out that spring breaks come along and they're going to interrupt everything. And people have that tyranny of the urgent and end up sort of slipping into old habits and not being as explicit. So this is, they're saying, sort of helping to keep their intention alive as they're going through. That podcast is episode 8 in How We Teach with Lewis and Strong. So the How We Teach podcast, really easy listen, but it's a longer one, I think, on a completely different realm. And in thinking of Indigenous ways and Indigenous representation and content, two great things that I've recently discovered. One is the elements of Indigenous style. So going back to the rope and language structure, and I guess in literacy knowledge also, we have APA, we have MLA, but what about our rapidly evolving, more socially conscious, intentional use of language around various, so just being culturally responsive to all peoples. But this specifically sort of has the FAQ of when referring to Indigenous cultures, in what way, like capitalizing the I, why are we using Indigenous instead of Aboriginal? What is appropriate, inappropriate language? So it really is a style guide for that. It's fantastic, but as mentioned, language does change and evolve, and more so even now quickly. So how long it'll last, I don't know, but $20. I got it from Monroe's. It's great. I just bought one for all of our EFP teachers, at least EFP 11, so I don't hold myself to that in case 40 people sign up and I don't have a book for them. Along the same realm, this was recommended. So I'm not intimate with this, but it's one of our English department heads said that this was a must-have, and it's Indigenous rights. So it is the rights, but I mean, especially when you get out of those primary developmental stages, the reading and the writing, the expressive and the receptive, and sometimes we can get to the reading through the writing a little, like it's so intertwined. So Indigenous Rights, a guide to First Nations, Métis and Inuit issues in Canada, but it is about getting that writing going and that richness of the thinking, but also with scaffolding the intentional with our writing and that reciprocal relationship with the reading in there. So those are two pieces of a different area that people are, I mean, it's in the curriculum, but people are really trying to be more intentional, but looking for resources, which of course the Finesse website has beautiful resources. So I'm really focused on foundational skills as well, but in the context of Indigenous content. Yeah.
That's wonderful. You are definitely a wealth of resources. And I wanted to let listeners know that you are joining us in the effective literacy practices for BC Teachers Symposium on July 20th and 21st. I'm very excited for this, and you're going to be presenting on the 21st at 11 a.m. and then staying around for the panel discussion at 12. So I'm really excited because this is going to give you an opportunity to tell us about getting the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to comprehension and vocabulary instruction. And that's essential for educators at all levels, in my opinion. And we're going to be able to have that opportunity to speak with people who are attending the conference, asking us questions. And you can say, hey, Corina, what about this situation? What would you do? And I'm really excited for it. So I want to thank you for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you again at the conference.